Senate leadership to be the ranking member of the Senate Budget Committee. He also serves on the Environment and Public Works Committee, where he has focused on global warming and rebuilding our nation's crumbling infrastructure. He's a member of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, where he has championed efforts to transform the energy system from fossil fuels to renewable power sources like solar and wind. He also sits on the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, where he has fought for greater access to affordable health care and improved education programs from pre-K through college. Please join me in welcoming Senator Bernie Sanders.
Well, let me begin by thanking you all for inviting me, and especially Stephanie, who did a great job with us when she worked on the Budget Committee. And I want to also thank you for the work you do, because as you know, we are up against a massive corporate investment in think tanks, in media, which goes a long way in influencing public opinion in the United States. And we desperately need progressive academicians who are prepared to stand up for working people and speak some kinds of truths that don't often get into the media. So thank you all very much for what you're doing. I fear that I'm going to be telling you what you already know, but the first point that I want to make is a very simple one that I know all of you are familiar with, and you certainly know this when you work in the United States Senate, or as I did previously as a mayor. And that is, you cannot siloize, that's my word, I just invented that word, siloize issues. Every issue is related to every other issue. And I'll just give you one example of this. I was thinking about it as I was flying in today from Burlington. Within a very short time, I'm going to be doing a town meeting in Vermont on the opioid crisis. And all of you are aware what a terrible crisis this is in my state, New Hampshire, all across this country. How do you address an issue like the opioid crisis? How do you address it? For a start, and just this speaks to the interlapping confluence of one issue on another. Can you ignore the role that the pharmaceutical industry has played in bringing forth addictive products onto the marketplace without testing them? Who's responsible for that? Where were the federal agencies that are supposed to protect the American people in telling us that these are addictive types of products? What is the relationship then between the pharmaceutical industry and the agencies of government that are supposed to represent the American people? And the answer, obviously, as I trust all of you know, that the pharmaceutical industry in this country is capable of doing anything that it wants, and in this case, being responsible for the deaths of God knows how many thousands of people. Where was the medical profession? Were they too busy, some doctors too busy going on trips to Florida sponsored by the pharmaceutical industry to say, excuse me, where have you tested this drug? They were also complicit in the problem. And all of you know, a guy in my office was telling me he had a tooth pulled. And there was a dentist who was giving out all of the painkillers, like they were candy. Where was the medical and dental profession? How does the opioid epidemic, what is its relationship to the fact that the working class of this country is being decimated? That we have millions of people in America work longer hours for low wages, who are frightened to death about what is going to happen to their kids. I was in West Virginia a couple of months ago. There are articles in West Virginia where the funeral parlors cannot even keep up with the overdose deaths that they are seeing in that state. So how does the opioid epidemic relate to the fact that we have a shrinking middle class, that there are parts of this country where people are economically going nowhere in a hurry, where there is massive despair? How does that relate to the fact that for millions of people, really rather an incredible statement, life expectancy, do you all know that, is going down? Do you know that? For millions of people, life expectancy is actually going down. How does that happen? Is it a fact Perhaps, and I think it is, that so many people see nothing in front of them for their own lives or for their children's lives, that getting high on heroin is for them something positive. Can we deal effectively with the drug epidemic without giving hope to people that their lives and their kids' lives are going to be better? And then, on top of all that, just dealing with one problem, you have a so-called healthcare system, not really a system, which leads tens and tens of millions of people without any health insurance, and many more who are underinsured. And then you got a criminal justice system which says that if you are an addict, I'm going to arrest you and throw you into jail. And there's virtually no state, Vermont is doing better than most states, but no state which really has the capability now of providing the treatment that people need. So you got criminal justice, you got a economy which is a disaster for working people, you got lack of treatment for people who need it, you got a pharmaceutical industry pushing a product which kills people, a medical community which is not standing up to them, and a government agencies which caved in. That's just one issue, and that is the interrelatedness of one thing with another thing and with another thing. That applies in virtually every area that we are talking about. And obviously, as I think all of you know, I believe that there is a direct correlation between the role that economics plays in both domestic policy and global affairs, and that we got to get a handle on those issues, the interrelatedness of those issues, to develop a more progressive American foreign policy and for shaping a future in which we do not continue to see endless war and war and war. As we meet here in Congress, just another example, the Senate right now, and the House will pass it this week, is debating taxes. And again, the issue here is not a complicated issue because many of my Republican colleagues have already told you what this issue is about. The chief economic advisor to the president, Gary Cohn, formerly of Goldman Sachs, when talking about the Republican plan, he said, and I quote, "The most excited group out there are big CEOs about our tax plan." Well, thank you, Mr. Cohn, for being honest. And then we have a Republican congressman from New York State, Chris Collins, who says, and he quotes, he says, "My donors are basically saying, get it done or don't ever call me again," end of quote. In other words, what everybody knows, this tax bill has nothing to do with improving lives for the middle class, nothing to do with addressing the crisis of poverty, nothing to do with stimulating the economy and creating decent paying jobs. The billionaire class, led by the Koch brothers and a handful of others, have contributed hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, many hundreds of millions of dollars over the years to the Republican Party. And now they are telling their employees to do what they paid them to do, and that is to give them massive tax relief. And again, I don't have to go through the details here. You know it as well as I do, that the overwhelming percentage of the benefits are going to go to very, very wealthy people, that while there are differences between the Senate bill and the House bill is worse. There will be tens of millions of families in this country, middle-class families, that will actually end up paying more in taxes at the end of a 10-year period. In the House, it is about half of middle-class families. The Senate bill has about, I believe, a third of middle-class families. And meanwhile, in both proposals, there is an effort to make the estate tax even worse than it is. And that is to provide to the top 0.2%. Now we're talking about the Walton family, we're talking about the Koch brothers, we're talking about Sheldon Adelson, we're talking about the wealthiest families in America, when at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, these families will get billions of dollars in tax relief. If the House plan goes forward, which would be repeal of the estate tax at the end of, I believe, 6 years, that would give the Walton family up to $50 billion in tax relief. The Koch brother families, up to $30 billion in tax relief at a time when we have people in America going hungry, when we have hundreds of thousands of kids who cannot afford to go to college, et cetera, et cetera. Massive income and wealth inequality, and the Republican solution is to give incredibly large tax breaks to billionaires, all under the phony theory of trickle-down economics. That somehow if you give tax breaks to billionaires and large corporations, this money is going to create new jobs and lead to economic growth. It's a theory that I think no sensible economist believes in, and it's absolutely imperative that you and your fellow economists stand up and fight. Now, in the midst of all of this, in the midst of the Republican effort to give tax breaks to billionaires, we are looking at a moment in history. And again, this does not get the discussion that it needs, and I know Stephanie at Stony Brook is going to be working on this issue, and I hope all of you will. We have got to bring out on the table what income and wealth inequality means to this country, not vague terms. As a nation, are we satisfied with the reality that today the top 1/10 of 1%, not 1%, 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%? Are we satisfied that in the last 4 decades there has been a massive shift of wealth from the middle class to the top 1%? Are we satisfied? And nobody talks about this. You have to talk about it. Are we satisfied that in America today, the 3 wealthiest people in this country, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, and Warren Buffett, now own more wealth than the bottom half of America, that is 160 million people? Is that what America is supposed to be about? 3 people owning more wealth than the bottom half of the American people. Now, you're probably not going to read about that in the Washington Post, owned by Mr. Bezos, et cetera, et cetera. But that is the story. That is what's going on. And as all of you know, there is a direct relationship between wealth and political power, because these guys use their money to gain political power, and especially true since Citizens United. And on top of all of that, we have a very important document released recently called the Paradise Papers, released by a group of investigative journalists, and they gave us some 13 million files. And these documents kind of describe in detail just how bad the situation is. And they tell us how political leaders, not just in the United States, but around the world, billionaires, multinational corporations, Wall Street, and other wealthy and powerful people are becoming far wealthier by shifting their profits offshore to avoid paying taxes at the same time that ordinary Americans are struggling to put food on the table, to pay for health care, et cetera. Now, what I always find amusing about this is that all of these guys, and the papers mention that among the who's who of people who use these tax havens are major Republican donors, casino moguls, Wall Street investors, oil tycoons, and hedge fund managers, including billionaires like the Koch brothers, Sheldon Adelson, Carl Icahn, and Robert Mercer. They also include, as you know, major financial institutions such as our good friends at Wells Fargo, Citigroup, and Bank of America, and major corporations like Apple, Nike, and ExxonMobil. But closer to home, you got people in Trump's own administration who were named in these papers, people like Tillerson, Wilbur Ross, Gary Cohn, and Steve Mnuchin, among others. Now, what is interesting to me is all of these people, no doubt, And all these corporations are very patriotic. Very patriotic. They love veterans without exception, and they want to see a strong defense, and they want the infrastructure to be rebuilt, and they think America should have a well-educated population. The only problem is they want you to pay for that, not them. They're so patriotic that they're putting their money in tax-exempt countries around the world to avoid paying taxes to America. Let us remember that during the 2016 campaign, Donald Trump basically boasted that for many years he avoided paying his fair share of taxes. When he was accused of that, he said, "That makes me smart." He didn't deny it. He was proud of it. So this is what oligarchy is about. That's another term I think we should begin using a little bit more than we have in the past. And what oligarchy is about, not just in the United States, but around the world, is when you have a small number of very, very wealthy people who not only control the economies of their country, but control the political life of their nation as well. Today, the top in the world, forget the United States for a moment, think about what's going on around the world. Today, the top 1% in this world now owns more wealth than the bottom 99%. We have 6 individuals in the world that now own more wealth than the bottom 3.7 billion people. And it is important to understand that the way that oligarchy, political corruption, and authoritarianism work is they go hand in hand. Around the world, we have witnessed the rise of authoritarian demagogues who, once in power, use their positions to loot the resources of their states. These kleptocrats like Putin and his cronies in Russia use divisiveness as a tool for enriching themselves and those loyal to them. We've seen it in Saudi Arabia, where one ruling family has spent decades enjoying the country's oil wealth while setting the global standard for wasteful opulence. And why is it that President Trump seems so comfortable with these autocrats? That's an important question to ask. I know that many Americans scratch their heads trying to figure out why Trump has such an affinity for President Putin, a man who has severely repressed democracy in his own country, spent the last number of years trying to destabilize democracy, not just in the United States. And we have to tell President Trump that we understand that Putin told him that he had nothing to do with it. I guess that whole debate is over now. What more do we have to know than Putin told Trump that he had nothing to do with trying to undermine the elections here in the United States? And how incredible it is that we have a president who says, yeah, that's what he said, and I guess I believe him. Doesn't believe his own intelligence agencies, doesn't believe virtually every member of the United States Congress, but he believes Mr. Putin. But it's not just Putin. Why does Trump have such kind words for President Duterte of the Philippines, who is seriously undermining civil rights and civil liberties in his own country? Back in April, we saw Trump sending congratulations to Turkish President Erdogan for his victory in a referendum that would vastly expand his power and further weaken Turkey's democracy. Just a few days ago, as all of you are aware, after dozens of members of the Saudi royal family were arrested in the Saudi crown prince's effort to consolidate power to himself. Now get this, you got an authoritarian country to begin with, you got a new guy coming in who starts arresting people right and left, and Trump's tweet says, quote, "I have great confidence in King Salman and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. They know exactly what they are doing," end of quote. Well, I'm sure that they do know what they are doing. But should the President of the United States be congratulating the leader of an authoritarian country for going beyond where they have been in recent years and actually arresting other people in his own government? And on it goes. So, where are we? Where do we go from here? There is some very good news. I know I've given you some bad news, but let me cheer you up a little bit. And that is not just the elections of Tuesday that showed clearly that we had a referendum on Donald Trump, and Donald Trump lost big time. But it's not just the victories in gubernatorial races in New Jersey and in Virginia. Those are important. But there's something else that I think has not been picked up by mainstream media yet, which is more important. And that is all over this country, what we are now seeing is working people and young people, often people for the first time running for office, whether that office is school board, whether it's city clerk, whether it is city council, whether it is state representative. And I can tell you, because I know this from an organization that was created after my presidential campaign called Our Revolution. They just in Virginia ran 6 candidates, I believe all of them first-time candidates. They won 3, including a Democratic socialist who beat the 3rd most important person in the Virginia House of Delegates by 10 points, supporting a transgender candidate who won a major victory against the homophobe. But it wasn't only, they won 3, lost 2, and 1 is in a recount. And these are all new voices, people who are just starting to get involved in the political process. Massachusetts, dozens of young people started running for office and winning on progressive tickets all over America. That is happening. And what has got to happen in this country, to my mind, what I mean by when I use the word political revolution, is that we make it clear to ordinary people, to working people, to young people, that you don't have to be intimidated about running for office. And what I often say is, I work in the United States Senate. And if you think you are not prepared to be a member of the school board in some town, take a look at some of my colleagues in the Senate. All right? And that is beginning to happen. People are beginning to understand that democracy means getting involved. You don't want to run for office, support somebody else. You don't want, get involved in electing people, get involved in major issues. In Maine, you know what happened in Maine? Huge deal. You had an extreme right-wing governor who has refused to expand Medicaid in a state which is not a right-wing state. Maine is not a right-wing state. And 60% of the people said on referendum, you will expand Medicaid. So the good news is that we are seeing more and more people, often young people, working people, people who have never been involved in politics before, now starting to get involved. And we're finding out that they can win elections, that the establishment candidates really don't have as much support as some pretend that they do. That in many ways they are paper tigers. They have a lot of power, they're well known, but they have no real support behind them. And if we can mobilize people, getting them involved, we can do extraordinary things. And my goal is to see, among other things, that the Democratic Party be a party which represents people in 50 states in this country beyond comprehension, that there are half the states in America where the Democratic Party almost does not exist. They have no influence at all. We're going to change that. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I am not pessimistic. Because I go all over this country. There are a lot of young people, a lot of working people who want to be involved. We need your help desperately. We need you to help us to take on the billionaire think tanks. We need you to give us the ideas about how we go forward in some very difficult issues. So I thank you all very much for what you do, and I look forward to working with you in the months and years ahead. Thank you.